A third more pension funds invested in infrastructure last year as cash-strapped governments around the world sought out institutional investors to rebuild their economies. More than 185 pension funds had investments in infrastructure, and that was up from 136 the year before. That's according to research from Orium Capital Markets, which is an investment boutique based in the UK. The Australian Government Future Fund, for example, which is the second biggest institutional investor in infrastructure in the world, invested 6% more in the sector. How are we doing here in South Africa? Well, to find out in this week's infrastructure feature, I've got Jason Lightfoot of Future Growth on the line. Jason, welcome.
Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. What's the picture looking like on the ground here in South Africa?
I think it's very different from the international picture. There aren't a lot of funds really out there that play in this space. Typical type of funds are dedicated, infrastructure and developmental type bond funds, and on the equity side, it's more your private equity type of funds that play in that space. But again, they're very few and far between and aren't quite to the extent that the international asset managers play in.
Which is an opportunity. I mean, it's a pity, but it certainly presents an opportunity. And I very often I see the buzzword in institutional investing circles at the moment seems to be hedge assets, which is a portmanteau of growth and hedge. Do you think infrastructure fits the bill here?
Definitely. I mean, the South African government's earmarked about 4 trillion or so that they'd like to invest in infrastructure over the next 10 to 15 years. And obviously, we know there's no way that they can fund that themselves. So it's quite likely that the private sector would need to play a role there, and obviously in this space, pension funds as well.
And there's a deep social element to this sort of investing as well. And I know Future Growth has really played a leading role in the country in these sorts of projects. The Trust for Urban Housing Finance, for example, which was launched well over a decade ago, is an example of this sort of, it's almost development finance, it's social impact, it's in infrastructure, it's in housing. Tell me a little bit more about the Trust for Urban Housing Finance and how that's grown.
So pretty much you can see them as a development finance institution where they provide financing to entrepreneurs who want to buy apartment blocks in the city of Joburg. So they've been quite integral in terms of inner city rejuvenation, uplifting the centre of Joburg and actually just improving it to what it looks like today.
We see a lot of that where we're based in our Braamfontein studio. We see the development, and it's a fine example and case study of what happens if you provide the capital to entrepreneurs to go out there and deliver a service to a market that's clearly demanding this sort of low-cost rental, affordable housing, much of it student.
Exactly, and particularly in that quite a while back where the banks didn't want to fulfill that role in terms of providing their funding. You definitely needed the role of these different institutions who were willing to take that risk and obviously have a good insight in terms of what benefits it could provide to society.
And it just shows that if we're innovative, we can very often find solutions to the infrastructural challenge. And it's always instructive to see how well managed economies are approaching this need for infrastructure, because McKinsey has put a number on it in the many trillions over the next 15 years up to 2030 that we're going to need to pour globally into infrastructure. And George Osborne, the UK Chancellor, announced last year that he's working with 89 investment funds that make up the local government pension schemes over in the UK to create 6 British wealth funds. And he said it's going to save hundreds of millions in costs, and crucially that these funds will then invest billions in the infrastructure of their regions. So some bold, innovative leadership in the UK. What is the government doing here to crowd in the pension industry?
So there's been a lot of engagement with the CISA, which is the Association of Savings and Investments South Africa, which is in essence an association that pretty much talks to the industry or to the asset management industry. So they are engaging with them and with asset managers in terms of to see what structures they can set up. And a good example of that has been the renewable energy program, where they've been trying to crowd in funding to fund those projects and not alone just depend on the banks for those funding needs.
And we will see the baseload version of that in coal opening up this month as well. So quite exciting. And it really is a template for the public-private sort of model that we need to implement. But who takes the lead here? I mean, how do we match these pension funds with projects? Who's taking the lead in terms of the beauty parade here, Jason?
I mean, we've been doing it for the last 20 years, in fact. I mean, the size of our fund is currently about 10 billion. So I think we've been doing it for a while, and hopefully other asset managers will follow suit. I mean, there's obviously a lot of guys in the equity space, the ideas and the like. But ultimately, if you look at it, I mean, these assets are quite well suited for pension funds and retirement funds, given the asset liability match. They're long-term in nature, and they fit the profile, and obviously they offer great on-the-ground impact. So underlying pension fund trustees and members can actually see the benefit that their funds are going to.
And there does seem to be a real concerted effort to clean up the administration end from government. We had National Treasury issue an instruction note today in terms of the PFMA and another Municipal Finance Management Act to standardize infrastructure procurement and delivery. And it's really all about delivering value for money, and minimizing corruption. Do you think that these sorts of efforts will provide further comfort to trustees and institutional investors?
Definitely. I mean, all spheres of need to be on board, government and the corporate space as well as the pension fund industry.
That was Jason Lightfoot, Portfolio Manager for the Infrastructure Bond and Yield Enhanced Funds at Future Growth, sharing his thoughts on how we can increase institutional investment into infrastructure.